Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I always immensely appreciate your listenership. So I'm going to dive right into today's topic because we're in a new month, which means we have a new theme. And this month, we're talking all about food. This week specifically, we're going to be talking about food philosophy and why it's so important to understand yours. And then in the next episode this month, we're going to be talking about the thyroid and a little bit about gut health and food mapping because I have an incredible guest coming to the show, Mary Miller Brooks, who I actually have been following for years and invited her to participate in an incredible summit that I'm offering in April. A free online summit is coming your way called Confident Women Rising. So stay tuned for that. But when I interviewed Mary for that summit, I was so impressed with the way she thought about food and her approach to helping people with behavior change that I just really wanted to get even more from her, which is why I'm bringing her to the podcast. So I will be offering that interview to you in the next episode, which will air in just a couple weeks. But for today, we're going to talk about your food philosophy and why it is so important for you to understand your philosophy around food. Now, for those of you who've been longtime listeners of the show, you already know this, but for those of you who might be newer, I feel the need to say it, that I believe improving health, like any other area of your life, is truly an exercise in self-leadership. Your ability to improve your health will be reflected by your ability to lead yourself. The better you understand yourself, of course, the more easily you can lead yourself in a direction that feels in alignment with your values. So I have made my living as a coach for a very long time. However, I think it's really important for my clients and listeners to understand that my objective with coaching is to empower my clients to self-coach, which means I kind of take it upon myself to teach them how to examine their own belief system and start asking themselves some really good questions. Because when you're willing to get in the arena with change and stay hyper aware and brutally honest with yourself, and ask yourself really good questions, you can lead yourself in the most powerful way. And in the age of diet dogma, and in a culture that has copious amounts of nutrition information available at your fingertips, I think it's really more important than ever to turn back inwards and ask yourself, what's really working for you? And this is why I want to have this conversation today about your food philosophy and why you believe what you do. So what the heck even is a food philosophy? Well, in a nutshell, it's just your belief system around food. Knowing what you believe about food helps you to better assess if you're living in alignment with what you believe. It's a lot like knowing your philosophy on relationships. Knowing what you want, knowing what you don't want, knowing what you'll tolerate, knowing what you won't tolerate is really important for you to be able to find relationships that really nourish you. And I believe we have to have the same approach with food. So the most powerful place to begin to better understand your own food philosophy is to do what I call a brain dump or a thought download. I always use those phrases interchangeably. But all a brain dump is putting pen to page and asking yourself a question. And the specific question that I think you should ask yourself in order to start uncovering your own food philosophy is, what do I believe about food and why? Super basic question, right? But holy cow, is there going to be a lot that comes out on that page. And when you can start to see what you think about food, and that's the whole purpose of a brain dump, is you start to get a lot of thoughts coming out on a piece of paper, you get to start asking yourself, is believing these things serving me? Now, I don't know what's going to come out on your page. And I would argue that you don't even know what's going to come out on your page. A lot of people will try to convince themselves, I know what I believe about food. Write it down, because I bet there's some stuff that's going to come out on paper that you may not have been all that aware of. So although I don't know what's going to come out on your paper, what I do know from having worked with so many clients over the years is some beliefs that start to show up. Some of the thoughts that people write down are things like food is pleasure. Food is entertainment. Food is either good or bad. Food is the enemy. I believe in eating fill in the blank. I believe that intuitive eating, ketogenic dieting, intermittent fasting is the thing for me. And remember, the follow-up question to anything that comes out on the paper is, why do you believe that? And that's a very powerful question, because I think a lot of people have beliefs around food that have nothing to do with those beliefs actually serving them in a useful way. Meaning it's not really allowing them to move their life to higher ground, and yet they're still holding on to the belief. So by putting pen to page and just writing for 3 to 5 minutes, you will learn a lot about your current beliefs about food, which gives you an awesome opportunity to question those beliefs and ask yourself if you want to keep them. And I know what some of you are going to say, like, Courtney, come on. Like, I can't, like, beliefs are not that easy to change. But all a belief is a repeated thought. It is a thought you have thought so many times that now it's just a belief. And thoughts, my friends, are totally optional. You can change your thoughts, you can change your beliefs. And if you identify some beliefs that aren't working for you, I strongly recommend you go to work in changing your thoughts so you can develop new beliefs. So how do we start to figure out our food philosophy beyond just the brain dump? Well, number one, we have to start paying attention. And that's what the brain dump does, right? It allows you to get very intentional about your attention on your beliefs around food. But we also have to pay attention to physical sensations. We have to pay attention to our emotional landscape. We have to pay attention to our mental landscape. And then when we have this hyper awareness, we get to ask ourselves a lot of really good questions. Now, I am going to go through a bunch of the questions here and now and talk you through why I think these are important questions to ask. But I want you to know that I made you a copy of these questions that you can print out and use as a template for doing this as an exercise later. And I strongly recommend that you do. Why not? It's not going to take you more than maybe 15 to 20 minutes. And I think it's going to help you learn a lot about yourself. So you can print out the questions at graceandgrit.com/nourish. graceandgrit.com/nourish. So the first question I think is important to ask is, what foods do you believe nourish you? And why do you believe that? And I ask that second part, why do you believe that? Because I really want you to get clear on, do you believe certain foods nourish you because you feel nourished when you consume them? Or because you just read somewhere or had some guru tell you somewhere that that was a nourishing thing to do? There's a big difference. So what foods do you believe nourish you? And why do you believe that? Now, of course, there are some really common threads in what research continuously shows us is very nourishing to the human body. Number one, protein is a highly valuable resource for the human body for a lot of reasons. It's very satiating. It's very slow to digest, which means it stays with us longer. And it's kind of the building block of life. I follow a gal, an MD, on Instagram. Her name is Gabrielle Lyon. She's amazing. And she specifically studies the value of protein in aging populations. And she calls muscle the organ of longevity, which I love. I think that's brilliant. Muscle is the organ of longevity. If you want to live a long, healthy life, you most definitely should be concerned about the health and abundance of your muscle mass. And muscle requires protein. So protein is nourishing, absolutely. Vegetables, super nourishing. We live in a culture, right, where it's really easy not to eat vegetables. We tend to replace vegetables with a lot of processed foods. But there is no food on the planet that packs more nutritional punch than vegetables. You have your macro and micronutrients, you've got your phytonutrients, your antioxidants. So much value in vegetables. I think another truth that science shows us time and time again is that carbohydrates are to be respected. I did not say carbohydrates are not to be consumed. You should not have a fear of carbohydrates, but we need to respect carbohydrates, right? Because our body either utilizes carbohydrates for fuel or stores them for future use. And you can store a little bit of extra carbohydrate in muscle and liver cells. But if those sites are full, because we're eating so much carbohydrate and we're not being active enough, your body is going to store excess carbohydrate as fat. So carbohydrates are simply to be respected. Eating real food, definitely nourishing for the human body, right? Things that actually come from, whole food sources, not even things that come from whole food sources, but whole food sources themselves. Things that grow in the ground, things that come from living beings, plants, animals. Eat real food. But what is it that you believe nourishes your body? Because I can tell you what the research shows us time and time again, but I'm curious for you to discover what you truly believe nourishes your body. And remember, the second part of that question is, why do you believe that? Have you tested it and you really believe it because you have experienced it in your physicality that it nourishes you? Or are you just going based off of someone else's information about what worked for them? What foods do you believe deplete you? And another way of considering that is, what makes you feel inflamed? Inflammation, it depletes your body of valuable resources. And inflammation, we know, shows up in a lot of different ways in the human body. Everyone experiences it a little bit differently. Some people might get headaches. Some people might get joint pain. Some people might be chronically sick, so their immune system is really suppressed. Some people might have all kinds of digestive problems. Some people might have skin challenges. But in what ways does inflammation show up for you? And inflammation is definitely depleting valuable resources from your body. So I'll tell you some of the top inflammatory substances that I have seen time and time again in my own clientele. And again, there's a lot of great research showing us that these things can be very inflammatory to the human body. Alcohol, sugar, gluten, but I would say even on a broader scope, flour, dairy, and vegetable and seed oils, because they tend to be heated really high when they're processed, which changes their molecular structure, which makes them inflammatory in the body. And we do not want to be in a state of chronic inflammation, my friends, because we know that chronic inflammation is a precursor to disease. So acute inflammation is a really healthy thing. When you cut your finger and you experience inflammation at the injury site, that's awesome. Your body is working to heal itself. But when you are constantly ingesting things that are causing chronic inflammation, your body goes to war with itself. It starts attacking itself because it's confused. So what things do you know inflame you or deplete you? Again, not based on what you've read, not based on what has, inflamed your best friend, but what do you believe inflames and or depletes your own body in terms of food? And on that note, do you believe in the concept of everything in moderation? I hear this a lot, right? We throw this around a lot. Everything in moderation, right? That's a healthy attitude. But not everybody can handle sugar in moderation. Not everybody can handle alcohol in moderation. So what is true for you? What do you believe about sourcing your food? Do you believe that it's important to know where your food comes from? Or do you believe that it just doesn't really matter? Another way of asking that is, do you believe it's important to invest your money in food? Because that's how I look at food a lot of times, right? The way I'm spending my money on food is an investment. Because I could buy things that are really cheap and quick, but aren't going to give me any kind of beneficial return in the long run. Or I could pay a little bit more upfront and really reap so much more value over the long term. So I do personally look at spending money on food as an investment. And yes, I absolutely do believe that sourcing food for me is very important. I want to know where my food came from. I want to know, that it was like, if it's a plant, I want to know that it was grown in rich soil. If I eat an animal product, I want to know that that animal was treated humanely. I don't want to be eating foods that have been genetically modified. I don't want to be eating foods that have been tampered with in terms of antibiotics and drugs. But that's my own belief system. What's yours? Maybe it's not important to you, but I think it's important to know what you believe about it. In terms of sourcing food, I did an entire episode on this. It was episode 112. So it was a while ago. We're almost at episode 200. But episode 112, I interviewed a friend of mine who specializes in sourcing food. And anyway, if you have questions about that or want to dive a little bit deeper into that topic, go back and check out that episode 112. So one of my favorite questions in this conversation of food philosophy is, what do you believe is the purpose of food? That seems like a weird question for some of you, right? Well, of course, I eat food because I'll die without it. Yes, that's true. We definitely eat to nourish ourselves and survive. But I would argue actually a lot of people don't even eat to nourish themselves, right? They're eating just to get rid of hunger. They're eating to just be able to get through the day, but surviving and thriving, in other words, nourishing ourselves, I believe are two different things. So yes, we all eat for survival, but are you eating to just survive or to really promote thriving biology, which to me is true nourishment? And what are other reasons that you eat? Do you believe the purpose of food is to numb and distract and avoid other areas of your life? Because a lot of people, may not believe that, but that's absolutely how they're living. They're using food as a numbing agent. They're using food to distract themselves from the emotions that are boiling up in other areas of their life. They use food to avoid dealing with certain problems in their life. Do you believe that the purpose of food is pleasure? That we should be eating for pleasure? And this is a hot topic, right? Because I know a lot of people who are passionate that absolutely food is pleasure. And I have a little bit of a different opinion on that. I believe that food is fuel and that we should enjoy our food. Absolutely. Eating should be a pleasurable experience. But should we be eating as a measure of seeking out pleasure? I think that can be dangerous. Because I think it can prevent us from seeking out pleasure in other areas of our life. And I also think that our culture has done a really good job at demonstrating that constantly turning to food for pleasure is not really in the best interest of our health. But that's something that you have to get straight with yourself about. Do you believe one of the purposes of food is to reward yourself with pleasure? Do you think of food as a reward? So for a job well done, when you're celebrating something, do you believe that food is celebration, that food is reward? And is that a useful belief for you moving your life to higher ground, moving your health to higher ground? These are really important questions to ask because we often don't stop to ask ourselves these questions because we live in a culture that promotes all of these things. Food is pleasure. Food is reward. Food is celebration. Food is entertainment. Food is an agent to numb yourself from the reality of life. So we buy into those things without ever really questioning if that belief is actually helping us to live the life we want to live. And again, because I work with women on these topics every day, I can tell you that those beliefs have gotten women into a real deep state of dis-ease, both mentally and physically. And of course, there are some people who decide to believe that, yes, I do reward myself with food. And if you're at peace with your reasons for believing what you believe, awesome. That is all that matters. But if you look at your beliefs and start questioning them, are they serving me? And you don't like your reasons, that's awesome too, because it presents you with an opportunity to start practicing new beliefs, practicing new thoughts. What do you believe about the act of eating? So a lot of people, when I ask this question, they don't even know what that question means. What do you mean about the act of eating? How do you eat? How do you believe you should eat? And I'm not talking about what specifically is on your plate. We've already addressed that. But what's the energy you bring to eating? How do you think you digest food the best? How do you think your body goes through the experience of eating in the most nutritious way. So where are you eating? Are you eating in your car, at your desk? Are you eating in environments that totally stress you out, with people that totally stress you out? Do you believe that those things have any impact on your digestion, on your experience of food? Do you believe in eating mindfully, paying attention? Do you believe in eating slowly? Do you believe in being grateful for your food? So these questions that I'm going through with you, these are just some of the questions that will help you to get clear on your food philosophy. There's obviously a lot more you could be asking, but this gives you a start. And again, if you want a copy of all these questions, you can register at graceandgrit.com/nourish. graceandgrit.com/nourish. And as you answer these questions and you get to see what your current food philosophy is, you get to ask yourself, is it working for me? Is it working for how I want to feel mentally and physically? And here's the truth. You can only answer that question honestly if you've been consistent with your food philosophy. Because if you believe these things, but you're not actually in alignment with them, meaning your actions are not lined up with your beliefs, it's really hard to answer that question, is it working for me? So it is very important for you to answer that question well. Is my food philosophy working for me? You've got to be consistent with the things that you do believe. And of course, this is where most women struggle. So women convince themselves that they need, a radical diet or a new exercise program or something because what they're doing isn't working. And some of that's true, right? What they're doing isn't working. But I would argue that most women actually know a lot about what works for them. They're just not following through with it. They're not being consistent with their own belief system. So are you in alignment with your food philosophy? And, to answer that question, you can ask yourself, what are the mental and physical signs that I am in alignment with my food philosophy? Well, number one, you're going to feel at peace with food. Because if this is what you believe about food and this is what you believe nourishes you, you're mentally going to feel at peace with your decisions. You're not going to have all this regret and guilt and beating yourself up about making choices that aren't in line with what you believe. So I think in general, you're going to have a sense of peace, and most likely you're going to have a strong sense of well-being. But I think it's equally as important to ask yourself, what are the signs that I'm out of alignment with my food philosophy? What are the physical and mental signposts telling you that you're not even living in alignment with your own belief system? And I would say one of the most prominent things is that you're going to feel mentally diseased, right? You're not going to feel at peace. You're going to feel guilty. You're going to spend a lot of time, kind of feeling regretful, questioning your choices, possibly beating yourself up. That's where we get into self-loathing. So what are the signs for you that you're misaligned with your food philosophy? And what do you do to realign yourself? Because again, what a lot of women are doing in an attempt to realign themselves is they're reaching for new things. They're reaching for complicated measures. They're reaching for the extremes. They're trying to get someone else to tell them what to do. But I think the alignment that we need more of, the realignment that we need more of, is being true to what we already believe works for us. Being consistent with those things. So maybe you start tracking some of your behavior, right? To bring yourself back into alignment. Maybe you start setting some boundaries with yourself, practicing constraint, which I've done lots of podcasts on. And I know a lot of people hear that word, constraint. I don't want to live my life constrained. But if you're out of alignment with your own belief system, you're already living life constrained. And you're living life constrained in a way that has no benefit. It's only causing you a lot of unnecessary struggle. I'm talking about boundaries as an act of self-love. What are the things that you need to constrain, do less of, in order to live more in alignment with the life that you truly want for yourself? That's what I'm referencing. And I think a big part of realigning ourselves is allowing urges, right? A lot of us treat urges as if they're an emergency, that they must be answered, specifically our urges around food. And urges are not emergencies. Urges come and urges go. They do not need to be answered. And there are a lot of urges that you have in your life every day that you don't answer. There's things that you want to say to people that you don't say. There's things that you want to do that you don't do. Like maybe you don't want to go to work today, but you go. You had an urge to not go, but you went anyway. So you already have a practice of not answering certain urges. So stop telling yourself that you can't allow urges with food. Of course you can, but it's a practice. And if you're out of practice, it's going to feel a little tougher at the beginning. But with more practice, of course, it's going to get easier. All right, my friends, that's it. I hope that was helpful. This episode was not intended to be a kind of like telling you all about my food philosophy, because that's not going to help you. You need to uncover your food philosophy. Get to know what you believe about food, really get inquisitive about why you believe those things. Get real honest with yourself about, is it working for me? Keep the things that are, ditch the things that aren't, and start living in alignment with the things that you do know nourish you. And watch the magic unravel, because it will. It'll start to happen. You don't need extreme measures. You need to get straight with yourself and live in alignment with yourself, with what you want for your future and what you know is going to serve that future. So one more time, you can register to get the list of the questions at graceandgrit.com/nourish. And in 2 weeks' time, I will be having my friend Mary Miller Brooks come on the show and talk to us all about food intolerances. We're going to talk a little bit about gut health, about some of the challenges specifically with food that women face midlife. So it's going to be a really rich episode. I hope you will join me for that. And definitely keep your eyes peeled for the Confident Women Rising Summit, which is coming your way very quickly. It's a totally free online summit. I have about 16 incredible speakers speaking at this event, and we will be marketing it very soon. So just kind of keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. All right, my friends, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you again very soon. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.